Good morning, WRCR listeners. This is Mark Brownstein with Emerald Medicare. Good morning to everyone. It's so nice to be here again. For some reason, the month goes fast, and I'm honored and proud to have with me a very special guest, Jim Shooter. Many of you may know of him and his history and his stories, and he's a storyteller. And that's what he's done. And every time I get to spend time with Mr. Shooter in Nyack, I hear new stories. So, Jim, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
It's so nice for you to be here, and thank you. And again, we have a fan with us. We have Will here, who everyone knows. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about the business and the industry, and a little bit about your story. Again, I know you're from Pittsburgh.
That's
and
right.
So that's where it all started for you, as they say, as a young pup. and so you started, and tell us just how that started. That's a fascinating part of your life and your career.
Well, my family needed money. We were on some hard times there, and they won't give you a job in a factory if you're 13. And I liked comics, and I figured somebody must get paid for doing this stuff. So I put together some scripts and some layouts and things, and I sent them to editor of DC Comics in New York. And long story short, I sent three of them, and he called me up. I was 400 miles away. He didn't know how old I was. He called me up, and he said, we're going to buy these three and publish them, and we're going to start using you as a regular writer. And I said, oh, okay, it's fine. So away we went.
Well, so away you went. That's quite the beginning of the journey. And so they sort of wined and dined you and brought you to New York. Tell us a little bit about that great story. I mean, come on.
Well, like I said, it was all over the phone and in the mail, and so he didn't know how old I was. And after a couple of months, he said, I want you to fly up to New York, and I'll put you up in a hotel for a week. We'll pay for everything. He said, I just want you to come to the office every day so we can teach you some stuff. And I kind of hesitated because I'm, wondering how that's going to go. And he said, how old are you? And I said, well, I just turned 14. He says, put your mother on the phone. And so, I did. And she was on board, and it was all fine. And she had to come with me on my first business trip, which is a little dorky, but, Anyway, they were okay with it. The guy said, I don't care how old you are. If you can do it, you can do it.
And so you got to New York, and you got to see Broadway shows, and you got to sort of learn from some of the veterans of the business.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was lucky I got to work with some of the guys who actually were founding fathers, and Jerry Robinson, who created the Joker, and I don't know, lots of the older guys that Bill Everett, and I knew Jerry Siegel, one of the creators of Superman. And so that was something. That was really great.
So, that run at 13, 14 years old continued for a while. And what kind of work did you work on with at that time and develop?
Well, my first stories were Superboy, Superman, all the super characters, because they grouped them. They called it the Superman family, and there was 5 or 6 different titles that had Superman or some super character in it. And I did that for about 5 years. Then I was working on advertising and freelance, and before you know it, I've probably written almost every character from the major companies at one time or another. And got a big variety, and it ended up being editor-in-chief of Marvel at one point, and of course that meant I had to worry about all the characters. So.
Right. So before we get to the Marvel and DC, so your background and what you thought you would become when you were a boy, and some of what influenced you as you went forward in your career what was it that you were going?
Well, I wanted to be a scientist ever since I was a little kid. I was always reading science books and trying to learn. And in high school, I took 6 years of science and 4 years of school, and I took a special after-school course, and I took every math course they offered, because I was determined I was going to be a scientist, and I don't know what, build a better mousetrap, I guess.
So how did that influence? Clearly
Well,
it did, and the creativity that you came out of and the ideas that came out of what you created in your career has been influenced by that.
yeah, it really, studying science, it really opens your mind to all kinds of possibilities that, some people don't even consider. I've used that background hundreds of times because I keep track of it. Keep up with the trades and stuff, and it's been very helpful a lot of times, especially when I've been asked to write science fiction things.
So you are in your 59th year.
That's true.
We're not going to say how young you are, but we can calculate. But yes, that's an amazing career and filled with stories, and you're a storyteller. And I know, again, there's so many things we can talk about, but you love stories, you love writing it, but you also love mentoring people on writing stories.
Yeah, I try to. I mean, I feel like I'm not telling people anything I invented. I'm telling them wisdom of the ancients that I learned over the years from some really great and talented people. And also, I did a lot of research on my own. And I mean, the first person to really codify what a story was Aristotle. And then 350 years later, a big fan of his named Horace, he wrote a book called Ars Poetica. And the foundations of the craft are in those books. Aristotle's was called The Poetics. And, I read them. I don't recommend them. They're tough reads. But the concepts in them live to this day.
And so when you look at a story that others have written, or when you write a story, what are some of the elements for the aspiring writers or comic people on the air here? What are some of the key elements that you really bring that is unique and sells, I guess?
Well, I mean, the thing is, what Aristotle decided a story is a complete journey, okay? And your protagonist starts somewhere, and something happens to send him on a journey. And the journey could be complicated or difficult or whatever, but it comes to a point where all the forces in conflict are decided. That's the climax. And then your character is in a slightly different place than he was. That's the journey. It's getting there. And, it's like that's a super simplification. I mean, there's a million factors that you can have subplots and many events that send the story in different directions and all kinds of character development sort of things. But if you watch any movie or TV show written by a competent professional writer, you'll see it. You'll see like, they let me know who the guy was and where he is. Rocky starts in a ring. He's a boxer, right? Something happens to cause him. If nothing happens, he'll just age and be a pug the rest of his life. But he gets a shot at the champ. That's what happens to send him on the journey. And then the journey is complicated and difficult, and it comes to a climax at the end, where he makes it through the fight. He was the only guy ever to go the distance with Apollo Creed. And so now he's in a new place. He's not a pug anymore. He's got $500,000 and a girlfriend, and respect.
So what are some of the stories that you've written or things that you've been involved in that you're most proud of? Things that really you're known for? And again, a little bit about the history of the different companies you've worked for, but and been a part of. But some of the areas that you've been sort of really identified with.
Well, I think the best thing I did was when I started at Marvel. Business wasn't the whole business. The whole industry was dying, and I managed to get some good people and make things better for the creators, pay more, give them rights and benefits, and as a result, we got better creators, and we turned it around, and the whole industry started to prosper again. But in the course of doing that, I got to work on some really fun stuff. I did some foundation work for G.I. Joe, for instance, and then I had a great editor named Larry Hama. Turned it over to him. I did a little bit. He did everything. Same thing with the Transformers. I sort of wrote the foundation story, and then turned it over to a brilliant editor I had named Bob Budiansky, who created was creating names for the characters, creating characters, doing all this great stuff. So, I was involved in those, but I was also involved with, I created and wrote this story called Secret Wars, which they're now making into a movie. so that's kind of cool. And
That's very cool.
Yeah, and I created the black costume that Spider-Man wears that turns into Venom, and all kinds of stuff like that.
All science-related stuff, right?
Well, the science influences. I try to make it make sense.
Yeah, well, that's so. There are so many bumps in the road, as we talked about, and again, a storied career, but every industry has it, and so maybe you can just talk a little bit about, I guess the late '70s was sort of the beginning of the boom, and then everything, of course, changes, and so talk a little bit about that era for you and for the industry.
Well, like I said, I got some really good people working with me. I've got these names will mean a lot to people who know the comics. Got Archie Goodwin, maybe the greatest of all time. I got Louise Simonson as an editor. That's like better than Christmas. I got this guy named Larry Hama, and that's like winning the lottery. So, and there's Bob Budiansky, Carl Potts, Jim Salikov. I can't name them all, but they did good stuff. And for a while there, we were just we turned the whole business around because as we got good and started to sell copies, the market grew. And the rising tide lifted all the boats. And of course, the other companies, they're not going to just sit there and watch us. They're fighting back. And DC is doing Watchmen, and they're a big hit. And all kinds of things. The Dark Knight with Frank Miller, who was a genius kid. I gave him his first job.
All right.
And all these things started to happen that were good. New companies started, where everybody was dying the year I came in. Marvel was like the last survivor. But all of a sudden, there's First Comics, and Pacific Comics, and Eclipse Comics, and all these little companies starting up. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It starts off as a tiny little, self-published thing, and then, well, that turned out okay. So it was an exciting time for comics. I mean, what often happens is in a situation like that, there's some greedy people who want to cash in, and sometimes they end up destroying what you built in the process.
So was there a reason why or when the industry sort of changed? Was it too many? Was it greed? Was it acquisitions? At what point did the industry, from your perspective, sort of change? It sounded like it started as a burgeoning industry, and then it became this massive beast.
Yeah, well, I think that what happened was all of the above. I mean, there were acquisitions, and companies were bought and sold by people. I told the people who owned Marvel when they were trying to sell it, I said, "You're crazy. We're building you $1 billion business here. I've got the best people on earth. Let it go. You'll be much better off." But they were afraid. First of all, none of them had ever opened a comic book. They're a bunch of financial weasels. So they couldn't tell good from bad, and it's comics. What could it be? So they really just didn't know, and they just thought it was like hula hoops. We just caught a wave. It was a fad, and they wanted to get out where the getting is good. And so Marvel eventually became a company. Eventually it was sold to Disney for $3.3 billion. These guys sold it when it was really just taking off and going that direction. They sold it for $46.5 million. And I mean, that sounds like a lot of money. But compared to $3.3 billion, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No.
And so how did it find its downward? What happened in its downward spiral?
Well, before I came in there in the early to mid '70s, basically Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, other genius creators had built quite a success, and they were a little bit the victim of their success because Stan went on to work more on media things, so the Hulk TV show and animation and so forth. And so he wasn't really involved with the comics anymore. And at the same time, because they were successful, the owners wanted to publish lots more. And so all of a sudden there's, instead of there 12 Marvel comics, there's 100, right? And they got people who, maybe some had a lot of talent, but a lot of them at that point, their training had been that they'd read 1,000 comics. That's it. And so it started on this decline. It just wasn't as good anymore. And like I say, the whole
quality,
industry,
the writers,
quality,
the whole bit,
the whole thing,
the editors.
and also distribution wasn't good back then. There's a lot of factors, but we, when push came to shove, and it was do or die. And like I said, I was lucky. I was able to get some great people. I didn't have to explain a lot of stuff to these guys. They knew what they were doing, and man, they did it, and really took off. And for a while, they did well. And then the part started that you're talking about, where the companies are being bought and sold, and DC ends up as part of Warner, which is then sold to somebody else, and Marvel was bought by a motion picture company called New World Pictures, which then plunged toward bankruptcy and had to sell Marvel, and that was bought by Ronald O. Perlman, and then he went bankrupt because he's kind of strip-minded. And then it was Carl Icahn for a while, and well, anyway, wound up with Disney.
It's a lot of people trying to find out where the the home run was, right?
But the home run came because when I started there, I just seen Star Wars. I thought, holy cow! If they can do that for space opera, imagine what they can do with superheroes, And then the year I started, that's when the first Superman movie came out with Christopher Reeve. I took my whole staff. I said, we're going to the movies, and you could only get into the early morning show. So I took 35 people, bought them tickets, bought them popcorn. I said, this is a watershed. We got to see this. Oh. And so we did. And it took a while, but that was really the beginning of where it started to turn the corner, and the cinematic universe started to grow. And Superman did well, a couple of bad sequels. But then that Jack Nicholson Batman came along, $400 million in the first 2 weeks, and I said, here it comes again, and sure enough, we've gotten to the point now where the special effects have caught up, with the powers and stuff of the characters, and they're doing wonderful things, and some really great movies coming out, and they're the future that I thought they would have has arrived.
That's great to know that again, an industry like entertainment, which is what it is, has those kinds of cycles, almost like most industries do. But you yourself have been through cycles, right?
Yes.
And so again, back to the bumps. But here you are going to conferences now and able to sort of have people who know you come up to you and either get your signature or you speak about storytelling. But what was one of the highlights where you felt you were just absolutely on target, on a roll with this? Was it with the staff, or was it when you were creating? Was it with a particular company when you were doing editor-in-chief? What was the pieces?
Well, when I left Marvel, it was it had just been bought by New World Pictures, and the new owners were worse than the old ones, and I sort of made them fire me because I had to get out of there. And they did a few little adventures in the middle there. Tried to buy Marvel, raised money and tried to buy Marvel.
I know, that's amazing.
Yeah, and but Ronald L. Perlman, we bid $81 million. I had raised the money, and he bid 82.5, so he wins. But like I said, he kind of ran it into the ground. Meanwhile, I started my own company. It's hard to raise money for a startup. You're not going to raise $81 million.
Unless you've got credibility.
Well, yeah. But it's hard to raise it at all. But I had enough credibility to raise some money to get started. We started a company called Valiant. And after a few missteps, which were mostly my partner's idea, then we finally got to do the superheroes I originally set out to do. And within 1 year, we had taken a 17% market share, from 0 to 17 in 1 year. And most of that came out of Marvel's hide. So if they didn't like me before, they really didn't like me then.
That must have felt, interestingly nice.
That was, I'll tell you what, it was like, once again, it was kind of a do or die situation. And I poured my heart into it. And I, again, got some good people. I got people, I didn't have the money to compete with Marvel or DC or any of the big companies. So I got kids right out of the Joe Kubert Comics School. And I had some old guys nobody else wanted, but these guys were great, and they knew what they were doing. A guy named Stan Drake, it doesn't mean anything to you, but comics aficionados. He's the inspiration for Neil Adams, is another name. And some other guys, Ernie Colon, Steve Ditko, the creator of Spider-Man, came to work for me. Marvel didn't want him. He's a founding father, fool. But he was working for me. So with all that, those people who knew what they were doing and talent and stuff, and we just, like I said, we just outworked everybody, fighting back with man hours because we didn't have money, and it was very satisfying.
That's a great perspective on what was a challenge as you lost the bid and started a company, hired people who were waiting for your call, maybe, but also wanting to work.
Yeah.
And so you gave them the opportunity to, give back, get back.
Yeah.
Right? You all maybe had a similar motivation in wanting to sort of deliver a quality product.
Yeah, and the thing is, at that particular time, because in the Perlman era, his company was very marketing. Marvel was very marketing driven at that point, and they were just trying to make every single book collectible, so collectors would have to go out and buy 10 of them or whatever. So they all had, foil stamped covers, and every issue somebody dies, gets a new costume, or gets married or something. It was event marketing. They weren't telling stories. And the Image Comics, DC Comics, Marvel Comics, they were all doing that. They're like flashy pictures and a very thin read. And I thought, well, what do I got to fight with? I don't have the flashy artists. I got kids out of the Kubert School and some older guys who are going to be more traditional. I thought, all right, we're going to win with story. We're going to fight back with story. We're going to make good stories, tell them well, and let's see if people like that. And they did.
So 17% of market share of how big an industry?
Well, at that time it was booming, so 17% was substantial. I know our pre-tax profit for 1 year at Valiant, my last year, was over $25 million, publishing only. We didn't have any licensing yet, so that's just publishing. In the same year, we were publishing 8 titles a month. Marvel was publishing 156 titles a month. At the end of the year, their pre-tax profit was $2.5 million. It was 1/10 of ours. Wow. So with 8 books, that's pretty good.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Great. So there's real pride in that. And so how long did the Valiant business model continue for, and what happened? What's the next stage?
Well, the next stage was that, similar to Marvel, the greedy bankers and weasels, they wanted to sell it too early, and it wasn't on terms that were good for me. It was on terms that were good for them. And so I didn't go along with that and ended up getting out of there. And so, and then they crashed and burned, which is, I guess, some satisfaction on that. But then I started a company called, are you ready? Defiant. and had another go at it and did pretty well for a while. But the crash of the big companies, when they went down, the whole market went down. It was a tough environment to survive in, especially when Marvel was suing me for made-up stuff just to try to put me out of business before I could, take another chunk of their share. So
what happened? How did the Defiant days proceed, and was that just an industry downturn in general?
Like I said, the big companies have been doing this sort of event marketing, and the trading card companies had done the same thing a couple of years before. And I thought, don't you guys see what's going to happen here? It's like you're selling phony collectibles. You're the Franklin Mint, and sooner or later somebody's going to realize these things have no value, and they didn't. I mean, that's a big event marketing. Superman, DC Comics, they did the death of Superman, and they sold 14 million firm sale copies into the network of comic shops around the country. 14 million. Okay. Well, people bought that thinking they're buying like this priceless collectible that someday will be worth money. Well, the stores bought them from sale, and then they couldn't sell them. So they're choking on their inventory. Every store in America had what they call a long box of these in the back room, and they were selling them in the quarter bin. So the people who bought it think you're going to put their kid through college with this thing. They go and they can't even get 10 cents for it. And like collector bubbles like that tend to burst. This trading cards did the same thing. They created what they call these chase cards and tried to force people to buy more and more and more. And my joke was always that they're a lot of their audience just got tired of that and started dating girls instead.
So how long did the Defiant run last for?
Well, we launched on the very month that the industry was started its collapse. It went from, if you call it top 100%, then it went down to about 18% of that. And it's hard to survive in that environment. Also, we nonetheless, we did pretty well at the beginning, considering. And then, like I said, there was a lawsuit by Marvel and trying to put us out of business. And they managed to delay us with the legal actions so that we couldn't get we had a toy deal with Mattel, and that missed its window, where that would have been really good. Anyway, it's just a bad environment then, but you know what? I wasn't done yet, so we started again.
My next question has to do with sort of a different direction, is that we talked about some near misses on the movie side.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just was curious about that, share some with our listeners. Again, movies were the next big thing, and coming out of comics, we all know what happened. So what are some of the stories you want to tell on near misses on the movie side, and how that can sort of transform an industry, but also transform your career?
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, when I started, I could see from seeing Star Wars and then the Superman movie, I thought that this is where we're going. And there's no reason we can't have both, great publishing and good movies. So one of the things that happened was Casablanca Record and Film Works, which represented a lot of big stars. They were talking to us about maybe doing, having studio musicians do the music, and then we would do a comic, sort of like the Archies or Josie and the Pussycats, that kind of thing. And they said, why can't we do that? And I said, we can do it, and we can do it well, So we started working on that, and I wrote a story that was supposed to be for a 1.5 hour animated special, which they were going to, Casablanca was going to produce to kick it off. And then I would turn my story into them. The guy, we had a meeting, and he's just tapping his finger, and he says, "This is not a 1/2 hour animated special." So I'm feeling like I blew it. He said, "This is a feature film." I said, "Oh yeah, I meant that, yeah." So my executive vice president of business affairs, Alice Donenfeld, another genius lady, she goes to the Cannes Film Festival and somehow gets in to see Bo Derek, and this is right after the movie 10, which is a big hit, and everybody wanted to do Bo Derek's next movie. She gets in to see her somehow, and she reads my treatment. And Bo reads my treatment, and she says, "I got to play this character." And she agreed to be attached at that very meeting. As a matter of fact, it's the cover of People magazine, which has Bo Derek and her husband walking toward the camera. And it's on the cover of People. And if you look closely, in her husband's hand is a stack of Marvel comics. It was right after that meeting that the picture was taken. In fact, they actually cut Alice Donenfeld out of the picture. They just wanted Bo and her husband. And we made a deal that day. We thought we had the world by the tail, because we had all the studios in Hollywood bidding for the rights against each other. And for 2 weeks, we thought we had it made. Then Bo wanted her husband to direct it, and she amended her attachment so that he had to be the director. And nobody particularly wanted John Derek to direct that movie, and all the studios dropped out, so that project died. And that's just one of several horror stories.
What you told me earlier is that both of their careers didn't go much further than that.
No, I mean, she was trying to use her fame to reignite his career as a director, because it had kind of stalled. And eventually, I guess she did get a movie. It was a Tarzan movie, and it didn't do well, and that pretty much ended it for both of them.
So Right now, you're involved in a number of opportunities, but you're also traveling.
Yes.
And so what are you traveling and doing, and what are some of the shows? Some of the shows are pretty big that you're involved in and invited to.
Yeah, there are comic book conventions all around this country, and it's mostly people who they like the old comics, they like the movies. Some of them are into the new comics, not as many as before, but so they'll bring people like me in, and I'll sit at a table and autograph comics, from my era. And give lectures and talks. It's just I bring a bunch of what I call show and tell, just little souvenir things, letters from Stan, Stan Lee, the photos of Marvel at the time or Valiant at the time, and people like to see that. And everything in my show and tell books, I have 4 presentation books. It comes with a story. People say, well, what are these cardboard daggers? I said, well, on the Ides of March once, my staff murdered me with cardboard daggers. I said, so I collected them all. Everybody signed their dagger. I still have them. It's 30 of them. But it's not every day your staff murders you. So that's quite a thing.
Yeah, it's kind. It's sweet.
Yeah. So we had all kinds of
You had fun along the way.
Yeah, and so I show and tell all this stuff, and there's some of these conventions are very big. Like I think I just came from one that was about 200,000 people attended. The smaller ones, might be 10,000 or 20,000, or even the smaller ones are just a few thousand. But sometimes those are the nicest ones.
So to be this popular, or known, or recognized, a boy from Pittsburgh at 13, 14 years old, getting started, this many years later, again, what's a reflection on the industry then, now, and the future?
Well, when comics started, the big thing was syndicated strips. Everybody wanted to be Milt Caniff and have Terry and the Pirates, or like Peanuts or something like that. That's where the big money was. But it was really hard to get a syndicated strip launched. So a lot of cartoonists who were walking around New York from syndicate to syndicate trying to sell their strip, they needed to make money, and so they started working in this little comic book business, which started out reprinting newspaper strips. So they quickly ran out of strips, so they started having to create their own material. And it was sort of the poor stepchild. I mean, it was that's where you went to work when you trying to stay alive until you sold your syndicated strip. But the thing is, in spite of that, they had some great talent and great creators, and they created some wonderful things like Superman and Batman and Captain America and so forth. So in spite of being this poor stepchild, did pretty well and went through a big boom. Early 50s, I guess, was the peak. And then it started to taper off. I think there was television that came around, and I think also the comics did not evolve. They were still very much like they were at the very beginning, And so anyway, then it comes along to the 60s, had another boom because of Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, all these other great creators at Marvel, pretty much revolutionized the business. Well, DC's not going to take that lion down. They're fighting back, trying to do good things. So it's gone up and down, and when I was there, we had one of those up times. It was at Marvel. That would be late 70s through the 80s, and a few ups and downs since, But I mean, I'll tell you, there were some rough patches. But all in all,
and future
now, I would say that the movies are doing well so far, and if they don't run that into the ground, that ought to go for a long time because people love the fantasy, the fantastic element of it, and the publishing needs some help. It's not doing very well, and in my day, average comic book, Marvel comic book, would sell 300,000 copies. These days, if you sell 10,000, that's a lot. And so I think it's awaiting its next revolution. It's awaiting the next Stan Lee to come along.
So you've mentioned Stan Lee a number of times. You told me he's one of the founders of Marvel, a good friend. You got to know him until his passing.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about Stan and your relationship with him and how he helped you along the way.
Well, I mean, like when I decided I wanted to write comics to make some money, one of the reasons was because I was reading some of Stan Lee's stories, and they were so good. And I was reading some other comics that were kind of boring. I'm like, I wonder why I like these and I don't like those. So I'm an analytical little guy, and I started trying to figure out why is this good and this isn't. And when I thought I was ready, that's when I sent my first stories in. And I didn't send them to Marvel. I sent them to the competitor because I thought they need the help. And so anyway, and it worked. And I got a job and eventually wound up at Marvel. And when I was there, I was just the editor. I wasn't an editor-in-chief yet. And but during the 2 years I was the editor, Stan needed somebody to co-write the Spider-Man newspaper strip with him, because by that time there was an amazing Spider-Man newspaper strip. And he tried a guy, and that didn't work out. And then he asked me if I'd help, and I said sure. And so I worked with him for 2 years. I would write the story and break it down, do my little scribbly layouts for the artist. And then John Romita Sr., Grandmaster, Hall of Fame, all-time great, he would draw this art. Just my little scribbles were just to tell him what was going on. I wasn't trying to tell him how to draw. And then Stan would write the dialogue, and that's how we worked. And as a result of that, I got to work with Stan a lot and ask him questions and learn stuff. And he was very generous with his time and teaching. And so I walked out of that experience a lot smarter. And he recommended me when they needed an editor-in-chief. He recommended me, and so I got my shot. It was not much of a shot at that point because we were on the edge of death, but we turned it around.
Well, he believed in you, and you really valued him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll have a chance to ask at least a question or two, but I want to ask you one other question, and that is the young artists of today, the people who are aspiring, what is it that you would say to them in terms of motivation, inspiration to sort of be in this business, be in this industry, to make a living?
Well, whether you want to be a writer or an artist, learn your craft. It's not something just because you can write an English sentence doesn't mean you can write. I mean, there's an architecture to writing. It's architecture and art, and so learn your craft. A lot of good books out there. Most of them about screenwriting. I recommend the Robert McKee books to writers. And as for the artists, I mean, there are a lot of young guys now who really seem to be able to draw very well, but what they don't know is storytelling. I mean, trying to explain to them, you don't think of a story as a series of still pictures when you think of something having to work, something at school. You think of a little movie, right? Your job as a cartoonist is to draw pictures that make other people see the same movie that's going on in your head. And so that's the it's the learning the craft that's missing. There's not a lot of people teaching these days. There's not a lot of Stan Lees out there telling everybody what they need to know. And I try to pass on the wisdom of the ancients as much as I can.
The wisdom of Jim.
No, not mine. The wisdom of the ancients. And I don't tell people anything I made up. I just tell them what I learned from all the years working with all those great people.
So, Will.
Yes, I do have some questions, but I'll stick with the one. I am obsessed with learning about the creative process and being there in the writer's room and what that's like and pitching ideas. And your time as editor-in-chief at Marvel, what were maybe one or two ideas that you were pitched by some of the greats that worked under you? Obviously, your relationship with them had its ups and its downs. You referenced that earlier. Ideas in terms of story that you can look back on and be very proud that you were like, I knew that was going to be a hit. I okayed that. And then maybe some of the other crazier stuff that you're glad, like, I knew that wasn't going to work. Something that you had to be the bad guy and turn down.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I had great creative people, and so mostly my contribution was saying yes to people who knew what they were doing. But there were a couple times where I know with the X-Men, for instance, X-Men was a middle of the road book, middle of the road sales wise. I mean, and we had this one big storyline running in it, the death of Phoenix. It's called Now. It started out going one way, and I think in the middle, the writer Chris Claremont, great writer, he sort of veered off course because it was supposed to end with the character Phoenix becoming a bad guy and staying that way. Because Marvel had bad guys who had become good guys, like Hawkeye, the Black Widow, the Swordsman, others. We never had a good guy go bad. And so he liked that idea. But when he got towards the end of the story, he was like, maybe rethinking it, just because he really loved that character, so he tried to cop out, and I said, no, you got to do this, and he said, I said, having her just go back and, oh, I'm okay now. I was sick that day, or they fixed my mind. I'm okay now, I said that's not going to work. So I said maybe she goes to prison or something. He said no, they'd keep trying to rescue her. I said not on my watch, pal. Baloney, and because she'd done some really terrible things. And so the next day he comes in and he says, I'm gonna kill her. And I said, deal. You do that right. That's a good ending. And he said, wait a minute, you can't kill her. I said, yes, I can. I said, but I'm not killing her. You're killing her. And so we had this crazy argument. Anyway, they did the story, and he and John Byrne, the artist, I guess once they had to do it, they knocked it out of the park. And that issue took X-Men from middle of the road to top of the industry, where it stayed for 20 years, I'd say. And so I think I saw something good there. I thought we do this right. This will revolutionize things, and it did. Some stories or some things. One writer wanted to have Spider-Man father an illegitimate child, and I said no. And he said, well, why not? Like I have some moral problem with it. I said the problem is it's out of character. Spider-Man, the key to Spider-Man is a responsibility. He wouldn't do that, right? So anyway, he storms off and does an interview in a fanzine about denying him his creative freedom. And then when the fanzine comes out, he's worried he's going to lose his job. He came back in and said, I want my job back. I said, you never lost it, Bill, but, don't do that all the time, will you?
How were you able to, your reign, especially as editor-in-chief there, is renowned for being able to put out books on time and still maintain that quality. How did you get people to find that balance between keeping up the story quality and getting everything out on time?
It's really simple. I mean, see, when I worked at DC, we were buttoned up. You delivered, and the key is just not to let people, for people not to take, or you not to let them take more work than they can do with rare excellence. Okay, if a guy can do one book a year, fine, give him an annual. I mean, it's not about making them rush. It's not about speed. It's about how much can you do as well as you can do it. And so when I got the good editors, and I didn't have to explain that to them, they knew. And so they were very careful about making sure that they weren't overcommitting anybody, or that they weren't letting anybody overcommit themselves. And then, then good things happen. And the guys like the top guys, Walt Simonson and Archie Goodwin and Chris Claremont, they never gave you less than their best. They wouldn't do it. So give me your best first priority, then and being careful about how much you commit these guys. Then that's the way to go. And it was really important because it saved us a lot of money. And there I was able to pay the artists more because we were not wasting it with late charges and fees and stuff.
That's fair. I wanted to go back to the DC, your DC era, just for a moment. I just had a quick guilty pleasure question. Out of all the stories or all the characters that you wrote for, whether it be Superman, Supergirl, Legion, what was your favorite run that you look back on and was like, that's my DC magnum opus right there?
I enjoyed Superman. I liked doing that. I wasn't good at it at first. It got better, and I really enjoyed Superman. But I'd say my number one thing was the Legion of Superheroes. They're young kids, all right? Heroes in the future. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And I was young. I was in my teens when I was writing that. And so my characters were in their teens, I was in my teens, and a lot of the audience were in their teens. We all grew up together.
Very relatable.
Yeah, and that was great fun. It'll never happen again. That was great fun. And I poured my heart into it, and I borrowed my classmates' personalities. First I thought, boy, I hope they never catch me, because I thought that might not be right. But then I found out all writers do that. So.
Write what you know.
Yeah.
That's what they say. One more question: has Marvel Entertainment reached out to you in discussion about the Secret Wars movie for input or anything like that? Have they talked to you at all?
No, not really. No, the only thing they did was they asked me to. They apparently couldn't find any paperwork that said that they owned it.
Okay.
And so with this one guy I really like at Marvel, is a vice president or something or other. His name's David Bogart, gentleman, and he called me up and he was very honest with me. He says, we can't find any paperwork on this, and you could theoretically make claims that you own Secret Wars, the black suit, everything that came from it, the characters you created, the Beyonder, blah 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 blah. And I said, well, that's okay. I know it was work for hire. I was the editor-in-chief. How could I not know it was that Marvel owns it? And so anyways, I signed the papers for him. He insisted on paying me some money to sign my name. And I said, you don't have to. It's okay. He said, and I quote, take the money, stupid. So I took the money, I said, well, if you put it that way, sure,
So I have one question, and then if you have a last question, Will. But you're working on a series for Netflix now?
Well, yeah, there's a series that is in the early stages, and I'm not saying something couldn't go wrong, but it is so far so good, and everything is great. We've got a great director, a great producer, a great production company, and a good property, and Netflix is on it. They seem to everything seems all systems go right now. And so, and meanwhile, I'm getting paid, so I'm enjoying working for it, and I hope it all goes well, but we'll see.
Can you go into any detail about that? That's really exciting, or is it too soon to say?
They would kill me.
Okay, fair enough.
But I get it. Go ahead, Will.
Another thing that's big about your career is that you were really upfront and very adamant on fighting for the rights of your creators, even letterers and artists and everything. How is that the history of that come about? What's that fight like for someone who fought it, and how easy was it, or how?
Well, I mean, it was difficult in some ways. On the other hand, there was the company, everybody was dying, and in a way, I think when the president of the company, I reported to the president. When the president of the company hired me, he told me, he says, we're getting out of this comic book business. It's a loser. We're going to get into children's books and animation. And I said, you're so wrong. I said, this can be big, and we can make it big. And he basically said, hey, well, do whatever you want. Just try not to lose money. Well, do whatever you want. It's pretty freehand. And so I didn't have as much of a fight about most of the stuff as I thought I might. And especially when we started winning and started making money and turned the thing around, then I had a lot of flexibility and freedom. I mean, the president and the executives upstairs, they never cared about the comics. They never even opened a comic book. The president, at a deposition once, he was asked to name 5 Marvel characters. He couldn't do it. So as I was Conan, that's not a Marvel character. So as long as we were doing well, I could get away with all kinds of stuff, and getting away with it and everything we did. I mean, I was correct. You motivate these guys, you give them something to work for, or you give them a stake in what they create, which we did. You pay royalties if they succeed. They get they succeed with the company, and so, as opposed to just getting their little flat rate. And and it all kept working, and we were really growing and doing wonderful stuff. It lasted for a while. I don't know what it's like now, but that's how it was.
Jim, a proud man, a proud story. Proud to know you as a local superstar, and so you have that reputation, and again, everyone has a career that evolves, and you're still doing it. You're still creating.
Yep.
And again, really honored to be here with Will, who helped prepare me for today, and you and I have talked quite a bit.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
So thank you, Jim, for being a part of WRCR Radio. This is Mark Brownstein from Emerald Medicare. Always nice to be here. I'll see you next month. Thank you.